Good evening. You'll have to pardon me. I was attempting to enjoy the great outdoors. Unfortunately, the great outdoors is full of small, wriggling complications. You may call them fish, squirrels, or neighbors, but the truth is, the most persistent species in the wilderness is the human being, especially the sort that arrives uninvited. Tonight, we present 3 short excursions into rural hospitality. In our first story, a young woman discovers that her rustic rental comes with a caretaker, and possibly a few other caretakers she never met. In our second, a budget traveler hears scratching in the floorboards, a sound that's neither mouse nor entirely gone when she leaves. And finally, in our third tale, a late-night knock on the cabin door brings a pair of polite strangers. Too polite. They may not have brought marshmallows, but they do seem prepared to stay a while. Some people rent a cabin for peace and quiet. Others see it as an open invitation. So, if you're headed into the woods, remember, fresh air is healthy, solitude is refreshing, and a locked door is only as trustworthy as the last person who had the key. Now then, let's step inside, shall we? The caretaker's key. I rented the cabin because it sat just far enough from cell service that my phone turned into a clock. That's what I wanted. No notifications, no news, no chance for anyone to reach me with one more ask. The listing had 5 photos: a bluish lake, a wooden deck, a tiny interior with a wood stove, a loft bed, and a kitchen with a coffee maker older than me. The description promised a caretaker on the property if you need anything, which I skimmed past because I never need anything. I wanted quiet and a door that locks, and the cabin had both. Getting there took 3 hours and a change in the light. Paved road to gravel, gravel to rutted dirt, and then a gate with a combination lock that clanked open like a jail door in a movie. The owner had messaged me the code that morning, 1976. "Please keep gate closed at all times due to wildlife," she wrote. I pulled through and hopped out to latch it behind me. The forest muffled my car in seconds. Poplars, pines, a skinny creek hurrying along below the drive. The caretaker's place was a single wide trailer set on blocks near the gate. I saw it through the trees and felt that mild, irrational embarrassment of being watched while you arrive. As if I'd be graded on backing into the small parking pad by the cabin. But nobody stood outside. No dog barked. The cabin was better than the photos. The deck faced the lake, which wasn't as close as the wide-angle lens made it seem, but close enough that if someone shouted from the dock, I'd hear it. Inside, a table, 2 chairs, the wood stove, books nobody meant to read, a pile of board games missing crucial pieces, a tiny bathroom with a shower I would later discover was a trickle at best, and an entryway hung with 3 coats, 2 flannels and a waxed canvas jacket, which I assumed were props left to make it look rustic. I unloaded groceries and a bag of firewood I'd brought just in case. The fridge hummed, the kind of old compressor sound that starts as white noise and then morphs into voices after a while. I made coffee. I stretched my legs on the deck rail and watched a pair of loons take turns diving and resurfacing 20 yards apart. That first evening, I walked the perimeter. The owner's message had included a warning about the property line. "Please do not cross the creek at the bottom of the hill. Neighbor has strong feelings." I followed the creek down to where it bent around a clump of ferns and saw a faded piece of flagging tape fluttering from a branch. Strong feelings about what? Water is water. I stepped back anyway. I slept in the loft with the window cracked and woke up once to the sound of an engine idling far away. It stopped before I could decide whether to be annoyed. In the morning, I found the gate closed exactly the way I'd left it, and the single wide looked the same. Curtains drawn, no movement. I realized I didn't know the caretaker's name, which made not needing anything easier. On day 2, little things started to tilt. A spoon left in the sink that I was sure I'd already put away. The flannels in the entryway now hung with their sleeves rolled to the same length. My coffee tin shifted to the other side of the counter. These are the sorts of things you forget you did yourself. You blame your own distraction. You tell yourself you're noticing because there's nothing else to notice. That afternoon, I hiked up the old logging road behind the cabin. It switchbacked and ended at a small clearing where 3 game trails met. There, tacked to a tree, was a trail camera, the kind hunters use. It was angled at chest height, pointed down the path I'd just walked. I stepped in front of it and waved like an idiot, then immediately regretted it. The camera did not belong to me. I took a side route back to the cabin and pretended I hadn't seen it. That night, the engine again. Not idling now, but inching along. Gravel, stop. Gravel, stop. It took a full minute for me to realize it wasn't on the road above, but on the driveway itself. The headlights never reached the cabin windows, but the sound did. I slipped from the loft and stood in the dark by the door. The deadbolt was locked. The latch was one of those old brass hasps that would fail if anyone really wanted it to. The engine cut. Silence. In that silence, a tiny metal clink, like a key ring bumping a doorknob. "Hello?" I said, and hated how I said it, soft, as if not to startle a deer. My voice made the cabin smaller, no reply. I stayed there long enough for my eyes to invent shapes. Then the engine started again, reversed down the drive with deliberate slowness, and eventually disappeared. In the morning, I found tire marks imprinted in the soft earth near the cabin, overlapping my own. Near the front steps, scuffed dirt where someone had turned around carefully, avoiding the slab of flat stones that marked the edge of the deck. Whoever it was respected boundaries, or wanted me to think they did. The caretaker broke cover mid-morning, walking up from the gate with a coil of blue rope slung over one shoulder. He was 60s maybe, with a fisherman's tan and a hat that had lived on his head for decades. "You're all settled then," he said, which should have been a question. He didn't introduce himself, and I didn't ask. He glanced past me into the cabin and then up at the loft window. "You keeping the gate closed?" "Yes," I said. "Good. People see open gate, they think it's public access." "Was that you last night?" "Last night?" He squinted as if the word itself was bright. "Number I go to bed when the radio goes quiet." He glanced at the coats on the hooks. "You're welcome to use those if you go out on the water. Weather turns quick." And then he walked to the deck rail and retied one of the ropes securing the canoe in a series of exact, sailorly knots that hadn't loosened in 20 years. After he left, the cabin felt surveilled. Not just by him, but by the idea of him. A person who had keys, who existed in the same coordinates as me whether or not I looked. I told myself not to be dramatic. Millions of people live within arm's reach of other people every day. I made more coffee. I read a book for an hour without absorbing it. I went for a swim and came out cold and shivering and happier than I'd been in months. That evening, I decided to test my sanity. I set a dime upright on the kitchen counter, half on the wood and half on a paper map of hiking trails. I put one of the flannels at the far end of the coat row and knotted the sleeves together. I took a photo of the living room on my phone. Table, chair angles, the book face down on the armrest, so I could compare it in the morning and either laugh at myself or not. I also dragged a dining chair in front of the door, not because I thought a chair would stop anyone, but because I wanted the sound if it moved. The engine did not return that night. Neither did sleep. At 5, I cracked a window for air and heard a loon cry out on the lake. Then something else. A small splash and a soft clack of wood on wood. I padded downstairs. Through the slit of the curtains, I could see the canoe pivoting slightly against the dock, knocking gently. Beyond it, a fog feathering off the water. Nobody there. I unlocked the door, moved the chair, stepped onto the deck, and froze. The dime was upright on the map where I'd left it. The flannel was tied the way I'd tied it. The book's dog ear bent at the same page. But on the deck rail, aligned with the seam where 2 boards met, sat a little pyramid of pebbles. 5 smooth stones, 3 at the base, 2 above, 1 on top. I hadn't put them there. I would have remembered. They weren't threatening. They weren't even interesting, just gathered from the shore and stacked neatly at a human height. The breeze wouldn't have done it. An animal couldn't. That left the caretaker, or the invisible category of not-quite neighbors who learn the routines of every rental and study them like weather. I felt stupid for the chair, and stupider for feeling relief at this non-message. A stack of rocks means nothing. That's why hikers do it, to mean something in places that don't care. At 10, I walked to the caretaker's trailer with every intention of being reasonable. He was in his yard fixing a chainsaw that didn't want to be fixed. Up close, he smelled like cedar shavings and sunscreen. "Morning," he said. "How's the water?" "Cold," I said. "Hey, did you put stones on the deck rail?" He paused in a way that surprised me. Not guilty, more like he was sifting possible answers for one that wouldn't make things worse. "No," he said, "but you shouldn't be leaving the canoe loose. Kids come through sometimes and they think everything that floats belongs to them." He nodded, as if that explained an entirely different question. "You're doing all right? Couple more days?" 3, I said. "Good," he said, and went back to the chainsaw. Back at the cabin, I checked my traps. Dime, flannel, book, unchanged. Stones, gone. In their place, a single twig laid parallel to the seam in the rail, like a drawn line. I laughed, and the sound was brittle. That afternoon, I walked back up to the clearing and stood in front of the trail camera again. I said, "If you're playing, I'm done." I said it to the camera, and to the idea of the camera's owner, and to the trees. Nothing happened. No engine that night. No stones. No noises except the hum of the fridge pretending to be voices I half recognized. The last morning, I cleaned as obsessively as you do when you're being reviewed. I swept the floor, washed the mugs, folded the blankets, left the keys on the hook. I took one of the flannels down and put it on, then put it back because it seemed like crossing a line I couldn't name. At the gate, as I punched in 1976, the trailer door opened. The caretaker lifted a hand. "Safe drive," he said. "You too," I said, which made no sense. He hesitated. "Hey," he called. "Do me a favor and don't post about the cabin. Owner doesn't like traffic." "No problem," I said. I hadn't planned to. He nodded, satisfied, and closed his door. Halfway down the paved road, service returned. My phone vibrated back to life, and with it came a message from the owner time-stamped the day I arrived. "Delayed until now. So sorry," it read. "Gate code changed to 8542 for the week. Neighbor issues. Caretaker will swing by to update you in person." I looked in the rearview mirror at miles of trees I wouldn't see again. The code I'd used, 1-9-7-6, had worked. It had belonged to somebody. My review mentioned the lake and the silence, and how the stars were clear. I didn't mention the pebbles or the engine or the way the flannel sleeves were rolled. I said the caretaker was helpful. I didn't say he had a key, or that maybe everyone did. The Crawlspace. The cabin was cheap because the listing was honest. Mouse activity possible. Possible felt like a dare. It was off-season. The rate was half what it would be with leaves on the trees, and I told myself that mice are part of the package. You trade city rats for country mice and call it even. The driveway was a one-lane slash through scrubby trees up to a clearing. The cabin was a rectangle with a porch and a pitched roof. Inside, it smelled like cold wood and old coffee. The owners had left a handwritten note. "Welcome. Please keep food sealed. The stove's pilot can be fickle. If you smell gas, turn it off and we'll come up. Enjoy." I unpacked dry goods into plastic tubs I'd brought. Rolls of Ritz, oatmeal, coffee, pasta. I congratulated myself on being a competent outdoors person while plugging a plug-in air freshener into an outlet by the couch. That, I realize now, is the detail that makes this more my fault than anyone else's. I brought fake lavender into a place where the only smell that matters is the one that tells you something else is here. First night, I heard the standard mouse schedule. A scurry at 10, a lull, more scurrying around midnight. The sound seemed to whip around me like a lasso, under the couch, behind the stove, along the baseboards. I clapped my hands. Everything stopped. Everything slowly resumed. I put in earplugs and fell asleep anyway, proud of not being precious. Day 2. I found dry oatmeal scattered on the counter I thought I'd wiped. Toothmark confetti on the paper bag of coffee. I cleaned like a person in a commercial, sprayed vinegar water, set the traps I'd brought but didn't want to use. That night, I placed my trash can outside on the porch to keep from tempting anyone. The scurrying changed. It moved vertically. Not behind the stove, but inside it. A soft, hollow tapping like a spoon bouncing in a pot. Something inside metal. I turned the oven light on, as if that would help. I watched a shadow pass the stove's back vent and felt stupid, because that's not how shadows work. I shut the oven off and slept with the porch light on for no reason, except I wanted to make a cone of safety somewhere. Morning, I checked the traps. One had gone off but was empty, which is, for the record, worse than finding it occupied. I stood with my coffee and stared at the half-inch gap under the kitchen cabinets, where the toe kick met the floor. The gap was like a smile you couldn't read. Anything could pass through there. There was a little grate near the baseboard by the fridge, too. A metal rectangle with dust-furred slats. I dropped to my knees to look in the grate. It was one of those cheap vents that doesn't cover anything. It just opens to a hole. A dark space under the floor the size of a shallow suitcase. I shone my phone light in and saw insulation puff and a trickle of mouse droppings, and beyond that, something else. Not a mouse skeleton, not a nest, but wood, horizontal slats, a door. I crawled to the other vent by the couch and peered in. More of the same. A crawl space under the entire cabin, low and probably damp, and not somewhere you'd willingly go. The owners had left a binder with instructions. What to do if the power went out, how to relight the water heater, emergency numbers. Between bears are uncommon but possible, and please strip bed at checkout was a photocopied note that didn't quite match the rest. Please do not tamper with crawlspace access. Wildlife can enter. We check it weekly, No need to access for any reason. The font was different. The margins were wrong. Why would you emphasize a place you didn't want people to think about? I made a plan to ignore it. I put towels at the base of the doors. I cooked pasta and ate it on the porch steps like a raccoon. The air freshener puffed its lavender chemical every 20 minutes and made everything feel domesticated. Night 3, the schedule changed again. The scurrying had a rhythm, a roll, a pause, a faint tick. It was soft enough that I couldn't place it at first. I turned the TV on to static, then off. I lay on the couch with a blanket over my head like a child. The rhythm stopped when I did. That's always the part that turns noise into fear, when it responds to you. I have no idea what time it was when the scraping started. Not inside the stove, not inside the walls, under the floor, directly beneath the couch. Slow, deliberate, as if someone was cutting through cardboard with a dull blade. I held still for long enough to become convinced the sound was my heartbeat. Then it paused in sync with the moment I held my breath, and I had to accept that it wasn't. I sat up. The scraping stopped. I lowered my feet to the rug, and the rug seemed to amplify everything. I took 3 steps to the kitchen. The floor felt hollow where it should have felt solid. I don't know how to explain that sensation to anyone who hasn't felt it, as if the thing you're relying on has a second, thinner skin. I pulled the couch away from the wall. I climbed on top of it like that would help. I stared at the vent by the baseboard. In the black rectangle, something gleamed. A shine that could be an eye or could be the fake lavender mist catching the porch light through the curtains. The shine vanished. The scraping resumed, fainter now, a receding attention. I didn't sleep. I sat with a kitchen knife and a headlamp, neither of which made sense. I waited for the sun to turn the windows into mirrors. I put the knife back once I could see my reflection, and hated the person who had needed it. Then I called the owners. The woman was kind but tired. "Oh, honey," she said, like we were friends. "Yes, they get in sometimes. We've sealed it as best we can, but they find ways. We do have a pest control guy who can swing by." "Is he local?" I asked. My voice sounded brittle and high. "He's our handyman," she said. "Name's Travis. He helps with everything." Travis showed up 2 hours later in a truck with drywall dust permanently embedded in the carpet. He was younger than I expected, sunburned, friendly in the way of people who carry ladders for a living. He knocked before stepping in. His eyes went to the air freshener and back to me. "Where are you hearing them?" "Under the couch," I said. "And in the stove, and everywhere." He laughed politely and got on his knees by the vent. He shone his own light in and leaned closer than I would have dared. "Uh-huh," he said. "I'll take a look in the access outside." "What access?" I asked. He led me to the side of the cabin where the siding didn't quite meet the ground. Hidden by a row of river rocks was a small plywood hatch with 2 screws that had been removed and reinserted so many times they stripped the wood. Travis lifted the hatch and wiggled into the space like a cat. He slid a flashlight ahead of him. "Back in 10, he said to my ankles. "Maybe 15. His feet disappeared. I stood in the sunlight with my arms crossed like a scarecrow. 5 minutes, 10. From beneath the cabin came the bump of a shoulder against joists and the scritch of a tool rubbing wood. Then his voice, not frantic, but careful. "Hey, just so you know, it looks like someone's been down here. That wasn't me." "Recently?" I asked, ridiculous syllables stacked into a shape I could barely say. He shimmied back out, dusty and different. He shook his head like a dog and then pointed with his flashlight. "See that?" he said. The beam lit a flattened track in the dust, not an animal path, wider, smooth in a way that suggested wheels. From the access hatch, the track ran the length of the cabin to a place beneath the living room, the hollow spot I'd felt with my feet, and ended at a panel in the floorboards above, a rectangle of wood a hair different in color from the surrounding boards. The kind of access contractors leave to run wires and then forget about. Except someone hadn't forgotten. "Could be the previous owner," he said. "He did all sorts of weird stuff himself. Or, it's possible someone's been sheltering here in the winter. I've seen it. They find an opening and they make it work." "How recent?" I asked again. He ducked back under before answering and returned with a folded towel, a can of beans, and a toothbrush wrapped in a rubber band. The towel was damp. The toothbrush smelled like toothpaste. "Pretty recent," he said. We stared at the floor together. The panel was almost invisible from above unless you knew to look for it. A small hole in one corner suggested a finger loop for lifting. "I'll screw it shut," he said, already moving. "And I'll put a new hasp on the outside access, and I'll leave some traps. That'll sort it." "What if they're in there now?" I asked. "Then they'll leave tonight when they see I've been here," he said with a certainty I envied. "People don't want trouble." He did what he said. Long wood screws driven at angles that made the panel a part of the floor again. A metal hasp over the access door outside with a new padlock that snapped shut with a clean click. He swept the kitchen like a decent guest, gathered tools, told me to call if I heard anything else, and left behind the empty kind of quiet you get after someone helpful departs. I lasted one more night. There were no noises, no scraping, no hollow footfalls, just the chemical lavender tick and the relief that felt almost like grief. I slept on the couch because I wasn't getting back on the floor. In the morning, I cleaned as if for an inspection. I carried the trash to my car and folded the towel Travis had brought up out of habit and then dropped it like it burned me. I wrote a note for the owners that said, "Everything's fine. Thank you." Because what else do you say? On my way down the drive, I stopped at the mailbox to leave the key in the little lockbox the way they'd asked. The box's lid hung open, the code wheels misaligned. Inside, there was already a key identical to the one on my ring. For a second, I thought I'd somehow duplicated it. Then I realized what I was seeing, a safe place to keep spare access for anyone who knows to look. I left the key, closed the lid, spun the dials to zeros that weren't the right combination, and drove away. A mile down, in a curve where the trees opened to a meadow, I caught service and a text came in from the owner. "Hope it's going well. Travis is running late today. His truck broke down. Let us know if you need him tomorrow instead." I stared at the words until the road blurred and then pulled over so I wouldn't kill anyone. The handyman had been punctual, friendly, effective. He had also been someone else. I didn't go back for anything I forgot. When the owner asked for a review, I wrote the truth in a quiet register. Great location. Rustic. Some wildlife. The floor creaks. I meant the part of the house that's a house and the part that isn't. I meant the threshold that keeps you safe until it doesn't. I meant the panel screwed shut by a person whose name I never learned. Double booked. On the listing, the cabin looked like a secret. Cedars pressed tight around it, a string of cafe lights on the porch, a hot tub with steam rising into cold air. It had 100 five-star reviews, each a variation of magical, perfect getaway, the silence is everything. I booked 2 nights and told the host I'd be arriving late. "No problem," came the reply. Self-check-in with smart lock. Code will be sent day of. The code arrived at noon that Wednesday. 4321. The message included a warning about the road between the cabin and the highway. A washout last month, now passable if you take it slow. Please do not use Apple Maps, the host wrote. It takes you to the neighbor's hunting property. Bad vibes. I took it slow. Starlight through branches, gravel popping under the tires. When I reached the cabin, it was less charming than the photos and more honest. The cafe lights sagged. The hot tub cover had a tear in it. But the porch steps felt sturdy, and when I punched 4321 into the keypad, the deadbolt retracted with a motorized whine, and I felt that ridiculous little thrill at technology working in the woods. Inside, a couch, a TV mounted a little too high, a kitchen with a chalkboard that had a welcome message and a list of house rules written in bubbly script. No shoes inside. Please don't adjust the thermostat more than 2 degrees. Hot tub lid is heavy. Lift with 2 hands. A guest book on the table with hearts dotting the I's of "had a lovely weekend" and "we got engaged." I flipped to the back out of habit, to the most recent entries. The last page had been torn out cleanly. I made a sandwich, put my bag in the bedroom, and locked the door out of instinct. I know that's overkill. A locked door inside a locked cabin is like wearing 2 seatbelts, but it helps me sleep. I watched an old movie at low volume, set my phone on the nightstand, and was asleep by 11. Sometime around 2, a car pulled into the gravel with the practiced caution of someone who expects mud. Headlights swung across the bedroom ceiling. The car door opened and closed. Another opened and closed. Voices in the gravel. 2 of them, male, one saying, "See? It's here." The other, "Looks smaller than the pictures." I lay there, heart thudding. Maybe they were lost. Maybe they were the fabled neighbor with bad vibes. Then the smart lock's motor whined. The front door clicked open. I went from groggy to cold in a heartbeat. I grabbed my phone and had no service. The door to the bedroom was locked, but that's not a plan. I stood in the dark and held absolutely still because movement felt like confession. Footsteps crossed the living room, direct, assured. The voices were no longer voices but a low murmur of syllables I couldn't make out. One of the men tried the bedroom door. The handle jiggled. A pause, then a gentle rap, too polite. "Hello? Sorry. We're checking in." I swallowed. None of the polite scripts were useful here. I didn't want to be rude to a stranger who thought he was supposed to be there. I also didn't want to open the door at 2 a.m. in the woods. "I'm in here," I said, and immediately regretted how that sounded. Small, confessional, pinned. "Hey," the man sounded relieved. "We have a reservation. Check-in said 2. We're late. Sorry, we'll be quiet." "I also have a reservation," I said. "I checked in at 9. The lock code worked." "Ours too," he said. I heard the other man whisper something. The first man again. "Must be double booked. Can we just get our stuff? We'll stand outside and message the host." I pressed my fingers to my eyelids and saw cartoon stars. This is how you get tricked, I thought. By fairness, by wanting to be the reasonable one. "I'm not opening the door," I said. "I'm calling the host." "No service," he said immediately, which made my skin climb. "You have to drive back to the highway. It's like 20 minutes. Look, we'll wait outside." The front door clicked shut. I heard the motorized whine as one of them punched the lock. Footsteps on the porch. Gravel. The car door opened and closed. Silence. I stood there with my hand on the knob for longer than I want to admit, hearing my pulse in the door. Then I snapped on the lamp and felt exposed. I took a screenshot of the reservation, the message thread with the host, the code. I wrote a draft of a message I'd send when I had service that tried to be firm without sounding paranoid. I put boots on and a jacket and stood listening for a full minute before I cracked the bedroom door and peered into the living room. Empty. The front door's little circle of glass looked out onto a slice of porch and 2 cedar branches. I crossed the room and put my eye to the glass. The car was still there. Engine off. 2 silhouettes in the front seats. Heads bowed like people sleeping or people texting. They didn't look up. They also didn't look like they intended to go anywhere. I found the landline under the TV. This was the kind of cabin that still had one for emergencies, which felt like the opposite of an emergency until it wasn't. No dial tone. The phone cable snaked down the wall and into a surge protector that wasn't plugged into anything. I turned off the lamp and sat on the floor behind the couch with a blanket around my shoulders, like that changed the physics of the situation. An hour passed, then another. The car stayed. I drifted and jerked awake, neck throbbing, each time thinking I'd dreamed the part where strangers walk into the living room. At dawn, I heard the car start. Gravel popped under tires. The sound faded. I lifted the blind to watch them go. The taillights winked at the bend, then vanished. As soon as my phone found a bar of service at the edge of the property, I called the host. The voice that answered was different from the bubbly messages. Brisk, tired. "Hello?" "Hi," I said. I think the cabin was double booked. 2 men came in around 2. They had a code. "Impossible," the host said. "I never double book." "They had a code," I repeated. The host exhaled sharply. "Listen," she said. "There's a scam going around where people spoof listings and send their own codes to get into places. They scrape photos. They use the reviews. They book off platform." "What did their car look like?" "Silver SUV," I said. "Older. No plates on the front." The host swore in a way that couldn't be bubbled into a guest book heart. "Okay. I'll call the sheriff. Stay inside. Don't open the door. I'm changing the lock code right now." My keypad beeped. The deadbolt whirred. The host texted me a new code with a string of exclamation points. At 9, a white truck with a county seal crawled up the drive. A deputy in a hat that made him look cartoonishly official stepped out. He was young and trying hard not to look it. He took my statement on a small pad and then peered at the porch as if a clue might be sitting right there. "We've had a few of these," he said. "Someone gets hold of a maintenance code, or they buy a smart lock master key fob off the internet. They wait until they're pretty sure the place is vacant." "I was not vacant," I said, and he nodded like he was the one who needed reassurance. "Sometimes they steal the TV and the cutlery and go," he said. "Sometimes they squat. Sometimes they're just testing." He looked toward the trees, as if the men were still out there calibrating risk. The deputy left. The host called to apologize again, her voice softer now. "I'll refund the whole stay," she said, "and I'll send my handyman to add a deadbolt that isn't smart." "Please don't," I said before I could edit it. "Let's keep it simple." I thought I'd leave, but I didn't. I was stubborn about not being chased by bad behavior. I made coffee, took a shower, and tried to be a person. It almost worked. I walked the edge of the property where a string of faded pink tape marked the line the host's message had called "our fence." There was no fence. There was the idea of one. and then there wasn't. At dusk, a pickup rolled past the drive slowly, then reversed and parked on the shoulder where I could see it if I was looking, which I was. A man got out, not one of the two from the night before. This guy had a soft belly and work boots, and the complexion of someone who solves problems outside. He held his hands up like a magician, showing he had no cards. "I'm the brother," he called. "Host sent me to fix the lock." "I talked to the host," I said through the screen door. "She's not sending anyone." He nodded like that was reasonable. "Right," he said. "Okay. Would you mind if I just leave this here then?" He held up a small box, the kind smart locks arrive in. It was still sealed. She said to drop it. "You can leave it by the gate," I said. He smiled. "Fair." He set the box on the porch rail and stepped back. He looked past me into the living room. "Good place," he said. "I've been coming up here since before any of these were rentals, back when people kept their own keys." "Yeah," I said. My throat felt like I'd swallowed sand. "Thanks." He left. The truck idled longer than necessary before it pulled away. I stood there with the box, the porch light just bright enough to make the trees darker. I brought the box inside and set it on the table unopened. A few minutes later, curiosity wrestled with caution, and curiosity won. I peeled the shipping label back to see if it was real. Underneath was another label with a different address torn in half, a return re-stickered on its second or third life. I put the box back on the porch. I wrote the host. Someone dropped a lockbox. Didn't open. She wrote back immediately. "I didn't send anyone. Please call the sheriff again." I did. The same deputy returned, more serious now. He took the box like it was evidence and told me I should consider leaving early. "It's a hassle to call it a day," he said, "but sometimes the hassle is the point." I left before dark. I packed fast and didn't look under the bed because I didn't care if I forgot socks. At the bend where the road meets the highway, my phone loaded an email I hadn't seen before. The subject line was "Check-in details," from an address one letter off from the host's. The message was a perfect copy of hers, down to the cheerful exclamation points, except the code was 1234. The timestamp was 2 hours before the men showed up. I felt sick in a way that felt chemical. The men had a code. Then they had another. Then they had a brother who leaves boxes. Maybe it wasn't a loose conspiracy. Maybe it was just opportunistic. But I realized I had been an opportunity too. The locked bedroom door, the polite voice through wood, the urge to be fair. When the host asked for a review, I wrote what happened without adjectives. 2 men entered at 2 a.m. saying they had a reservation. Host responded quickly and changed lock code. Sheriff came. I left early. It felt unhelpful, but anything more would have turned into a map for someone else. I think about the men sometimes, in the car with the engine off, heads bowed, not texting because there was no service, not sleeping because I was awake. I think about the hot tub cover tear and the missing last page of the guest book and the cardboard smell of the new lockbox. None of it is dramatic. It's just a sequence, a door that opens because a code is a code, a voice through wood that sounds reasonable, a porch where a box appears because people assume you ordered it. The woods aren't the danger. Not really. It's the way we teach ourselves to open things that used to stay shut. It's the urge to be gracious in the dark. It's the assumption that whoever knocks can prove they should be let in.